Hey friends, before we jump into today's episode, I want to tell you about my brand new hangboard. I'm so stoked about it. It's called the Nug. This is a collaboration with Fictitious Climbing. I've had this hangboard design in my head for years. It's super portable. It's the best portable hangboard I've ever used. I'm obviously biased, but I designed it the way that I did for a reason. I use it for edge lifting and training. I use it to warm up at the crag every single time I go climbing. It weighs almost nothing. It weighs less than one climbing shoe, and I'm super proud of how it turned out. I would love it if you guys would check it out if you need something to warm up with at the crag or if you enjoy training. I made a short video talking about the design and everything I like about it. You can find it on the product page at fictitiousclimbing.com, or you can get there through my website at thenuggetclimbing.com. Just look for the Nug at the top of the page. I hope you check it out and enjoy today's episode. Hello, friends, and welcome back to the Nugget Climbing Podcast. This is Fundamentals, Season 2, Episode 3. I am joined by my co-host, Jesse Firestone.
Hello.
And today's topic is how to start weight training. Do you bench? Do you even bench?
I wasn't sure which question you were going to go with. I do. I benched yesterday. Yeah, I feel good.
How much do you bench?
Not very much, but I'm happy about it. I'm proud of myself.
That's great.
I bench. Yeah.
Okay.
Because with weight training, it's all about doing it.
All right.
Yeah, and not chasing numbers.
Okay, great.
Although that can be fun too.
I'm guessing that's getting into one of your tips. No, I have a real question for you. A lot of really strong climbers don't weight train at all. Chris Sharma is the famous example, but a lot of people do like some rings or some stuff that's, kind of off the wall training, but these guys aren't like deadlifting, and a lot of the people that we see at the top of the game don't do that. So why do you train with weights?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and actually not one that I hear a lot, but super relevant because I post a ton of weight training content on like my Instagram, probably just as much weight training content certain times of year as climbing content. And I think at least at first, and maybe even still, I have a reputation as being like a skills guy and, like putting strength kind of low on the priority list because I really prefer to emphasize like tactics and technique and psychology and all that other stuff that interrupts you from being able to get as much out of your strength as you could. But despite all that, it still is very important to have a reservoir of muscular force available to you because it is protective, not just in climbing, but in the rest of your life. And it improves the quality of your life, right? In a very direct way. So I think for the first, 10 plus years of my climbing got me really strong in a climbing way. And because I was also young, that was enough for me to feel like pretty robust generally. And then at a certain point, my general athleticism just started to kind of fall off, and just climbing wasn't enough anymore to kind of keep up with that stuff. Like, when I would help a friend move, or when I would need to like lift something really heavy, or even if I just need to like weed in the garden for like 3 hours or something like that, that stuff would really take a toll on me. And bouldering, climbing on a board, or like going to the gym is not going to make you strong in those ways, but those ways will definitely impact your climbing. Right. And so to me, it's like a defense mechanism to protect myself and protect my climbing career from just the onslaught of age and life, basically. And also, since I became a coach, there's just an overwhelming amount of scientific evidence that strength training is like pretty much the greatest health intervention that you could possibly make for the general population. Like, the kind of common refrain is, if you could put it in a pill, it would be the greatest medicine ever invented, right? And so once I became aware of the bulk of that science, it's like, well, how can I not spend all of this time that I have coaching pretty much trying to convince other people of what I know is true, which is that strength training is incredibly important. Long-winded answer.
Yeah, nice. No, I'm just clearing my throat because I was weight training right before you got here, and I just drank a smoothie, and I've got some phlegm, some smoothie phlegm. No. No, I agree with everything that you said. I think those are all really good points. And we don't, many of us as climbers don't like to think of ourselves outside of climbing. Like we only care about climbing. The argument that it's going to make you happier and healthier in your life is not very compelling for a lot of, especially young dudes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think those are still really good points. The way I always think about it is I have way more capacity with my body than I do with my fingers and with my other like climbing specific tissues and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's specific to me, but I think that's relatable for a lot of people. Like I started climbing at 18. I had lifted some weights and done other sports as a kid, and everything else that's climbing specific is still playing catch up. And because of that, I rely on body strength a lot when I climb, and I can conform a lot of moves into my style with body strength. So I can get around like the really bad crimp by doing a harder shoulder move. I do that kind of stuff all the time. And basically, I can tap myself out with 3 sessions a week on the board,
mm-hmm.
and doing more is not productive. But I can add a couple weight lifting sessions to that, keep my body power like topped up, and have more reserves and not really take away from my climbing.
Right.
So that's how I think about it. And yeah, there's all those other great benefits that you talked about, and I just feel better when I do it.
I mean, it's on that same note of being able to squeeze it in. It's like a way safer training intervention than bouldering.
Yeah,
for sure. Even if you are a younger person, that's still true. Like the injuries per hour or I think it's the injuries per 1,000 hours with weightlifting is like pretty much the lowest of any sport.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's lower than like ping pong. I'm not kidding. Like I've seen charts and studies, right? It's like incredibly safe. So if you have an injury or you're going through some chaos in your life or something, like strength training is such an easy fallback compared to something like climbing on a board, where it's fun, it's engaging, it's arguably even more fun than weightlifting for a lot of people probably, but it's just riskier.
Yeah.
Right? That's just a reality. So.
Right. This is kind of a hot take, and I'm definitely biased, but I also think that it's just quite easy, or rather, it's not easy. It's quite simple, and it takes very little time for most people to keep their body strength ahead of everything else. Like, I think it's a rare person for whom their body strength would be the true weak link in their climbing if they don't put some time into it.
Yep. So
it's kind of low hanging fruit, I think, for a lot of people.
I think I am that rare person, and I agree with you based on like the people I've worked with and stuff, for sure. Because my total body strength could definitely be higher, and it's something I've spent a lot of time working on. So it makes a lot of sense.
Nice.
I'm the odd duck.
Yeah,
for sure.
That fits. That tracks with everything I know about your climbing history.
Should we jump in?
Yeah. How many tips you got today?
I got a lot of bullet points, but 4 tips.
Okay, you should go first. I've got 3 tips and a bonus. I don't know why I keep saying that I have a bonus, but it's just a 4th tip is really what it is. You go first.
Okay, so my first tip really isn't a tip. It's just, I feel like this stuff bears covering in a podcast called How to Start Weight Training. And really, I think if you're just interested in weight training for climbing, you'll probably still find this podcast useful in a lot of ways. But I want to cover the stuff that I think I speak to a lot of climbers and they don't know these things, even though to me they seem like very fundamental, basic things. So my first tip is learn the basics. First basic, and the thing that probably helps drive a lot of decision making in strength training, is the SAID principle, SAID. So that's the specific adaptation to imposed demand. Basically, that means the body adapts to whatever stress you put on it. If you go running, the body is going to get better at running. If you go lift a bunch of weights, the body's going to get better at that. It's going to adapt at a muscular level and a cardiovascular level and other things too, in ways that will make you better at that activity, as long as certain things are true, like you're doing enough exercise or you're doing an amount of exercise that you can recover from, right? Otherwise, all other things being equal, whatever you do, your body's going to get better at, right? Which is kind of like the most amazing part of training in general, that we're like adaptable organisms. And that's why I think that's the most important thing to understand with weight training, is to just know that the stress you are putting on your body will cause it to adapt, and you will get better at the thing you were doing. And once you understand that and take control of that like feedback loop, is very powerful, right? It's like very empowering even. So that's number 1. Second thing that's important is progressive overload. And progressive overload is the idea that in order to get those adaptations, you want to somehow increase the stress that you're putting on the body very slightly over time. So one thing that we see a lot with climbing is that it's like very hard to tell if you're getting better or not. And part of the reason for that is that it's very hard to tell when you're actually overloading and when you're actually adapting to that overload. Because like we say like, oh, last month I did 2 V6s and this month I did 3 V6s, but like what if the V6s were softer this month or they were on different angles or something? It's very hard to progressively overload rock climbing. It's very easy to progressively overload weight training. So there are a lot of ways that you can overload. It doesn't have to be adding 5 pounds every week. And there's going to be a stage in weight training for everyone where they're no longer progressively overloading by adding 5 pounds a week. But at its core, the concept of progressive overload is add 5 pounds a week, right? So like in your weight training that you did just before I got here, I assume you had some kind of system planned in where you're like increasing the load or increasing the intensity in some way, right?
Yeah, I always copy over my last workout's notes to this week, start with that as a template, and then I've left notes for myself like, start with this weight again this week, add 5 pounds if you feel good.
Yep.
I'll do that every time.
For sure. Yeah, I do the same thing. I use shout out to Strong Notes, I think the app is called. Amazing iPhone and Android app where you can say, run this workout again, and it just like plops the whole workout in and gives you like a script to follow. And it puts all your weights and everything in there, but you can change the weights or the reps or anything like that as you go.
Cool.
Very slick app.
I still use the freaking Notes app.
I know. I used that for a long time too.
In the dark ages.
Somebody showed me strong. I think Ryan Frecka, who I may have mentioned on the last podcast, showed me Strong Notes, and I was like, "Oh, I'm on board."
Nice.
So if you can't overload the weights, another thing that's really important to understand, and something that's gained a lot of popularity recently, is RPE lifting. Have you ever used RPE? You
a little bit.
have. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So RPE stands for rate of perceived exertion, and the idea behind RPE is it allows you to auto-regulate. And auto-regulation basically means every time you lift 200 pounds, let's say you deadlift 200 pounds, right? And then next week you deadlift 200 pounds, and then the week after that, and then next Thanksgiving, and then 5 years from now, right? You're a different person each time there. You've had different sleep, different nutrition, you have different stress levels, you did different things yesterday. So that 200 pounds, even though it's exactly 200 pounds on the bar, it might feel different to you. RPE is a way of gauging how much intensity it takes for you to lift that weight, how much exertion it takes for you to lift that weight, right? So there's a few different kind of versions of RPE. The most basic one and the one that makes the most sense probably to a beginner is just how hard something feels from 1 to 10.
So that I use for every set always.
Okay, so you do your set and then you are like, oh, that was like an RPE
7 out of 10.
Right.
Or if it's in something, actually, I'll let you continue.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I have a riff. Well, I think a mistake I made for a really long time when I was new to weightlifting and I just I had like a performance mindset with weightlifting. Mm-hmm. I wanted to add 5 pounds every time or the equivalent, whatever that means. Mm-hmm. And if I finished the set, but it was a 9 out of 10, I would add 5 pounds for next time. And now these days, I always let things come down to where they feel like they're at a 7 or 8.
And then you progress.
And then only then do I add load for next time.
So that's an example of keeping the load the same and using your RPE gauge as your progressive overload. So making the same load feel easier is a form of progressive overload. And that's why RPE is an important thing to understand. So that's a great use of it. Another common version of RPE is session RPE, which is like you finish your whole session, you wait like 30 minutes, and then you say that whole session was a 7 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10 or whatever it was, right? Just again, totally subjective from 1 to 10. But if you do a whole session, so like we've been talking about board climbing a lot, right? Session RPE works pretty well with climbing sessions or board sessions because the session as a whole, taking into account your different state today, it is subjective, but like you can get a picture of what that session feels like. And if you do roughly the same amount of volume week to week, you kind of know how that volume feels, and you can know when to like tweak up the difficulties or tweak up the volume or whatever, right? So that's session RPE. The final sort of final form of RPE, and the one that I love the most, is called reps in reserve. And the basic way to understand RIR is if you take 10 and you subtract your RPE, that's theoretically how many reps in reserve you have. So an RPE 10 is you could not do any more reps or you failed, right? 0 reps in reserve. An RPE 9 would be 1 rep in reserve. An RPE 8 would be 2 reps in reserve. And
even if you're doing only like 3 or 4 reps in your set.
Right. So if you can write a program like this, it's a very effective way, in my opinion, to write a program. You say, I'm going to do 4 to 6 reps of this lift at RPE 8. So that means I would pick a load I think I could do 6 to 8 reps of and then do 4 to 6 of it. So I'll stop when I have 2 reps in the tank, right? But then the magical thing about reps in reserve is I don't need to count my reps. I just pay attention to when I feel like I could do 2 more reps. And I might do 4, I might do 6. If I feel great that day, I might do 8. And that way I know I'm auto-regulating and I'm not leaving gains on the table on days that I feel good, and I'm not pushing myself too hard on days that I feel bad.
Yeah. I like that. I've never played with that too much because I really like knowing that I'm going to do, 3 sets of 5 today. I just like that. And I try to pick the weight according to what I could do with, a couple of reps in the bank. Like I pick a weight that I could probably do 3 sets of 7. I'll do my 3 sets of 5. And that just works for my brain. But the thing that is really great about what you're describing is, as climbers, we're always weightlifting and climbing and fingerboarding and doing all these other things.
Exactly.
And you're not recovering the way a weightlifter would. You don't have like 3 days of full rest or 2 days of full rest before your next workout.
Their volume is so predictable week to week.
Exactly.
Yeah. Ours really isn't.
Ours is all over the place.
Yeah. It's like if you decide to go climb at a place that's up a hill 45 minutes, you've thrown off your whole week's recovery, right? But that is something that climbers do every freaking week, right? Bodybuilders are not doing that.
Right.
They're like counting their steps to the gym so that they can make sure that they're going to recover the same from every, maybe now that they have RPE and RAR, they're not. I don't know. Maybe they have taken this stuff on. But the crazy thing is there's a study, which I should have cited in my notes, but I can send you the study for the show notes, where they tested this. So they had lifters do a set, and then they asked them how many reps they thought they had in the tank, and then they had them go straight back on the bar and do more reps, right? And advanced lifters, like people who had been lifting for like more than a year with that lift, were very accurate at the number of reps they had left in the tank for the first 4, I think. So like 1 rep in reserve through 4 reps in reserve was accurate. And then beyond that, it was just like a range of like 4 to 6, I think.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But yeah, it's hard to tell when you could do like 5 more. That's pretty vague at that point, right? So my final note on this, still the first tip. Yeah. My final note is, I think just a basic understanding of anatomy and what muscles are involved with the movement is a really helpful thing when you're learning a new movement. So a website I love for this is called EXRX, Exercise Prescription. I think it's exrx.com, but it might be like .net or something.
I'll find it.
Just Google it, yeah. Because you can look up an exercise on there and it'll tell you like what the primary movers are, what the stabilizers are, what the antagonists are. And you can kind of like see those muscles on a human and like see someone perform the exercise and kind of understand what's going on. And if you're learning a new movement and you're new to weight training, that's pretty helpful to be like, oh, I need to like squeeze my glutes and kind of like sit there and like feel what that feels like and then go try the exercise. That's not a good way to learn how to actually do the lift, but it will help you understand how to coordinate your muscles. And a lot of learning how to climb well is coordination. So one big benefit of weight training that's not talked about very often is just learning what it feels like to do different muscle patterns. Like when you do a standard front flag, you're squeezing your adductor, right? And when you do a Copenhagen plank, that's the same action, muscle action. So if you're bad at flagging, it might not be that you're weak. It might just be that you're not coordinated, and doing some Copenhagen planks right before you get on the wall might help you understand how to flag harder.
Right. You're like turning on those like neural signals.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. That was number 1.
That was number 1.
That feeds in pretty well to my tip number 1, as I knew it would. My first tip is to train like an athlete in another sport, not like a weightlifter. And I'm going to share a few fundamentals for weight training that have been really helpful for me. And I didn't make any of this stuff up. I've, borrowed this from really experienced coaches, some in climbing, like Steve Bechtel is one, and coaches outside of climbing as well. But basically, all athletes who train with weights more or less follow similar guidelines, regardless of their sport.
Right.
And a lot of people like to point to like the big 4 as a great place to start. So you've got a push exercise, a pull exercise, a hinge exercise, and a squat. And I'm sharing all this just basically for anyone listening who doesn't know where to begin with weight training. Right. This is a great place to start. Pick these 4. I personally definitely deprioritize the squat a little bit as a climber. I feel like I get a decent amount of leg strength from deadlifting and from hiking with pads. And I think I have decently strong legs to begin with. But certainly, if you've never trained your legs before, doing pistol squats or something like that would be awesome for you.
As long as they're hard.
Totally. Yeah. Okay, so a really common approach with that is to focus on 2 workouts per week focus on 2 of the 4 per workout and do 2 workouts per week. So I'm just throwing this out as a very basic example for how to get started. So day 1 could be hinge and push. So that would be like deadlift and bench day. And then your second training day would be focused around the squat and the pull. So that might be pistol squats and weighted pull-ups or something like that. And then that's not very much training, right? That's only 2 exercises per workout. So then you fill in around that with accessory exercises that kind of complement the main 2, but don't take as much like central nervous system energy.
Lower load.
Yeah. So examples would be, okay, you have deadlift and bench on one day, and then maybe you accessorize with bent over rows, which are kind of a pull,
but they're horizontal instead of vertical.
Yep. Like a different kind of variation of a pull. Maybe throw in like reverse bicep curls. That's something I'm doing right now with wrist extension, mostly to train my wrists, and then like calf raises instead of squats, you know?
Sure.
Again, these are all just random examples. So that would be a good workout for Monday or whatever day of the week. And then on Thursday or Friday or whenever, you would do weighted pull-ups and pistol squats and focus on the pull and the squat as the big ones. And then you could do like overhead kettlebell press instead of benching to get some sort of a press, but to kind of switch it up a little bit.
Sure.
And you could do kettlebell swings instead of deadlift.
That's great.
Switch it up a little bit.
Yeah, I like having something. I like the idea of changing the velocity of the exercise. So like most of those other ones were like standard speed exercise, but kettlebell swing is like a powerful exercise, right? So for your accessory, if your normal hinge is going to be like a really high force, low speed thing, like a deadlift, having your accessory be like more athletic or higher velocity.
Yeah, kind of complement it.
Being in a different range.
Or like a little more specific to your goals.
Yeah, having more variety and variability is a good way to develop robustness. Having like more specificity and hammering the same thing a lot more is a good way to become a specialist, but you'll be like less robust, right?
Totally. Yeah, I've got thoughts about that later. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, me too. I'm kind of hinting at stuff I'm going to talk about.
Yeah. So again, my main tip here, I'm going to elaborate on it a little bit further, is train like an athlete in another sport, not like a weightlifter. So the other side of that is volume, total amount of volume. And another really common thing for, amongst strength coaches who are coaching primarily athletes in other sports is the 10 rep rule. So I think about this for working sets. I'll use deadlift as an example. I really like to do 10 total reps in a workout. 2 sets of 5 is a great example, but that's working sets. So I'll also do, a set of 10 really light ones to warm up, and then I'll progress to like a set of 8 at a little more load, and then a set of 5 at a little more load, a set of 3. And then I usually like to do a heavy single at my working load, and then take a longer rest, and then I'll do a set of 5. Take a longer rest, do a set of 5.
That's cool.
And I find that I don't have to warm up that way for everything. It's just usually for like the first 1 or 2 really big lifts for the day. Like if I do that for deadlifting, I'm pretty warmed up for almost everything else.
Yeah.
If I do that for weighted pull-ups on pull-up day, I'm pretty warmed up for pretty much everything else.
That's a magical thing about weight training that I think doesn't get enough appreciation. Like you can go climb and start your climbing session by just climbing, but a lot of people do a more thorough warm up, which makes sense with the way climbing is. High demand on the fingers, a lot of demand of range, coordination, etc. But like with weight training, I just walk out into my garage and I just like, if I'm benching, I'm doing my working sets within like 6 minutes of getting in the garage. Totally. You know what I mean? It's just, I just do like 3 sets where I put more weight on the bar with each set until I'm at my working set.
Yeah.
And it does not matter at all what I was doing before.
Yeah.
Whereas if I was going to go have a climbing session, like to come from my desk, I really feel like I need to like get my mind straight. Weightlifting is just so much more simple. Like move the weight.
I'm the same way. The first thing I'll do on deadlift day is a set of 10 at 40% or 50%. And I'll just build up from there. I don't have to like use bands or do jump roping or do a rower machine. It's just, you just start doing it and kind of build your way up. So the 2 sets of 5 thing, or I'm sorry, the 10 total reps thing, there's no right or wrong way to do that. There's a lot of different protocols that are great. 2 sets of 5, 5 sets of 2 would be, same rule, but a lot higher intensity. One I really like is 5-3-2. So I'll do a set of 5, and then my second set, I add some load and do 3 reps. And then I add some more load and do 2 reps. I really like that one. 3 sets of 3 is, that's 9 reps, but that's kind of within that rule. The idea is that when you're using weights to train for your sport, you want to get all the strength and like the neurological adaptations and the robustness without building unnecessary and non-climbing specific hypertrophy. You don't want your muscles to get bigger. I don't need a bigger butt to climb harder.
Yeah,
and
you don't.
I don't. Some people might. But yeah, so I don't want to be cranking out sets of 12 on the deadlift. That's just unnecessary. It's just going to make me bigger and more likely to build muscle that's not going to translate to the climbing wall. I'm not going to get better strength adaptations than I would from going heavier for fewer reps.
Right. I think this is a really important point, and it dovetails nicely with my next tip, which is to learn how to modify your training and to just kind of understand what the modifications and the adaptations are. And this gets really nuanced. I think we could have a whole podcast about just this. In fact, I just did a podcast on the struggle where we talked about this quite a lot, about different adaptations. So I won't hammer it too much here. But the short version is there are going to be some people out there where muscular hypertrophy is an important adaptation.
Sure.
So the 10 total reps thing is a really good guideline if you're just trying to get stronger from your weight training. In that case, I totally agree with it. A big thing I learned about myself in the last year or so is that I'm not sure if this is just the way that I am, that I naturally have a very high muscular recruitment, I think could be the case. But I respond better to longer sets in general. My strength remains very high, and I also feel better. And then I also get a little bit of muscular hypertrophy, which is something that I need because I'm a smaller guy and I'm trying to get bigger in my late 30s. I would like to enter my 40s just, a little more yoked than I am now, because that increases my likelihood of being climbing hard when I'm in my 60s, right?
Mm-hmm.
You lose muscle, and I should have said this at the outset of the podcast, but the rate at which you lose muscle doubles every decade after 35. So I'm 37. I'm in that category now. So that means like every 10 years, starting 2 years ago, the rate at which I'm losing my muscle is twice as fast. That means that I have to put every decade twice as much energy into gaining that muscle, right? Now I think you're a few years younger than me, but you have like such a head start on me with the muscle thing. So it makes sense that you don't want to do sets of 12 deadlifts.
Totally. If I accidentally do too many push-ups, I get bigger. It's just,
yeah.
It's quite annoying, actually.
Yeah, I've said the same thing about my wife. It's like she looks at a weight and eats some cheese and she gains muscle, and like, that's not the case for me. So
yeah, that's a good caveat. I mean,
just learning what you adapt to is important, and it takes a little bit of practice. But my tip is to learn how to modify your training. So load is a thing that we've talked about a lot. Right? You can put more weight on the bar or take weight off the bar. That's important to know. The volume of the set is another thing that you can tweak, and that's kind of like where your tip was, like, 2 sets of 5 or 5-3-2, or you could do like longer sets for hypertrophy, like 2 or 3 sets of 15. I've been trying to get bigger biceps, so I've been doing concentration curls, and I literally just take 20 pounds and I do it until I fail, right? And I do 2 sets to failure, and that's like so those are long sets. They're like 20 to 30 reps, right? Pain. And
sounds miserable. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, but wow, my biceps are getting bigger very slowly. So set volume is a thing that you can tweak, right? And then session volume, that's another thing that you can tweak. So that would be doing more working sets or doing more total exercises, right, in your session. And that builds your overall work capacity. It also theoretically increases the number of different things that you're adapting to, as long as it's not too much total load. I'm going to keep coming back to that over and over. Another thing you can modify, and it's important to understand, is the interset rest. So with a lot of strength training, you really don't need to rest that much. Like, you recover pretty fast. Like with a heavy deadlift is probably going to be the thing where you have to rest the most between your working sets, and that's going to be like 3 to 5 minutes for most people. I still often rest longer just because I can. Mm-hmm. But like if you want to bang out a deadlift and bench day, like you can do that in 30 minutes. Yeah. And it can be a pretty heavy day, right?
Especially if you can superset them and go back and forth.
For sure. Yeah. Which that has its own, that's a separate conversation. But that is another thing you can play with, is the order of exercises. Generally speaking, you want to do the heaviest and most compound things first. So deadlift or squat is probably going to be first, and then you'll go from there. So interset rest is important to understand. And then something that's very important to understand with modifying your training is range of motion. So there's a lot of debate out there about like what the correct range of motion is for a lot of different exercises. I'm sure everybody has seen people do pull-ups in the gym where they're just doing like the middle of the pull-up. In fact, I remember I had a friend a long time ago who's a total badass rock climber. And I remember seeing him do like a whole bunch of pull-ups, but he was just doing the middle of the range. And I was like, dude, how come you aren't doing the whole pull-up, And this guy was like a way better climber than me. And I think he kind of like laughed that comment off. But in retrospect, I realized like the middle of the range is where you produce the most force. So if he was just trying to like warm up or he was just trying to train that range, that's totally valid, right? But you should understand that there are other ranges too. So if you really struggle with having a hold with your arm fully extended and starting to pull into it, the beginning of the pull-up might be a really important range for you to train. And your weight that you can do there is going to be different than the weight that you can do in the middle of the range. So doing some of the range of motion is a valid exercise, right? Same thing goes with like squatting ass to grass would be another example. And when it comes to becoming more flexible, that's a type of training where we are mostly focusing on the range and we're not worrying about the load at all. So just thinking about the range of motion that you're moving through for general strength training is a good way to start to understand how range training actually works, because it's just strength training that takes place in a different range of motion generally. And then the final corner of range of motion that's kind of important to understand is isometrics. This isn't true for everyone, and the science is like, medium supportive of this idea. It's definitely true for me. Isometrics can be very like rehabilitative or like protective. So for instance, if you have like elbow tendonitis, taking your pushing and pulling, your heavy pushing and pulling exercises and just making them isometric for a couple weeks can sometimes make a case of tendonitis go away, right? Or at least stop until you bring a ton of high speed or heavy pulling back into the equation. So like if you're doing a lot of weighted pull-ups and you're having elbow problems, or you're just doing a high volume of pull-ups in general, just replace that shit with lock-offs. You can still weight them, probably really heavy. You'll still feel strong. You're not going to lose a ton of gains in the meantime, and it might help your elbow pain go away. And I've had a lot of success with this with other things too, with neck pain, with shoulder pain. There's often a way to modify your training if you're having some kind of issue. So like if you're getting into weight training, probably one of the worst things you could do would be to have like some tiny pain and not do your whole workout. You know, if you have a little bit of knee pain from squatting, maybe don't squat, but do the rest of your workout, right? Or maybe see if you can get under the bar and just like hold an isometric under the bar. Or maybe see if you can do a body weight squat. Maybe doing a few sets of body weight squats feels good, and then you can add some more load to the middle of the range, right? So basically, like, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want to look at all the aspects of our... That's a terrible phrase, by the way.
Why is that stuff around?
I don't know. We want to...
When was the last time that was actually done in human history? Someone was like, this bathwater needs to go. And
I'm not sure if I know an equivalent
there was a baby
phrase.
in it.
Yeah. We don't want to throw out the good with the bad, I guess.
We all get what you're saying.
Yeah. So it's just important to modify the parts of your training that you can, and just keep doing some form of training. So it'll be easier for you to do that if you understand all the different things that you can play with. I didn't talk about a bunch of other stuff here, like velocity and intent and stuff like that. Those are more advanced topics, which we can skip for now.
Yeah. A lot of that, I mean, I'm just riffing here. This is not one of my points, but a lot of that stuff can get so overwhelming.
Yeah.
Don't overthink it. Start simple. I don't do like timed time under tension reps. I don't time my reps.
Tempo?
I don't do tempo training. I just lift.
Yeah. A lot of that stuff really doesn't matter that much. I do think velocity is an important one, but it's a big topic, so we don't have to get into it.
Okay. And we will be right back. This episode is brought to you by Crimpd. This is a really great app when it comes to self-coached training for rock climbing. I personally love designing my own training plans. I love to take little bits of advice from a bunch of my different episodes and experiment with things and try new things and design my own training. But I'm sure that many of you either don't enjoy designing training plans or don't have the time. Maybe you have a busy job or kids, or you just prefer to spend your free time doing other things. If you want a great tool to help bring some structure to your training, Crimpd is a really great option. Crimpd has dozens of workouts that focus on all different facets of climbing performance and training, everything from strength to power to flexibility, you name it. You can choose from a variety of bouldering or lead climbing workouts. There's a wide variety of hangboard protocols or strength exercises you can try with videos that show you what to do. And you can trust what you're doing because all of the workouts have been carefully crafted by world-class climbers and coaches. Check out Crimpd to level up your training. Go to crimpd.com or download the Crimpd app for free from the App Store and consider signing up for Crimpd Plus to unlock even more training power. Crimpd, training on your own has never been easier. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. I am a huge fan of therapy. It's helped me with having better boundaries around work. It's helped me build a healthy relationship with my girlfriend. It's helped me enjoy my climbing and feel more clear about what I want to do in climbing. Basically, it's a really helpful tool to do better at life. You can talk about anything, whatever you're struggling with or want to get better at. Your therapist is simply there to listen and help you find your own way. I go to therapy twice a month through BetterHelp, and nothing beats sitting down and talking with a professional who is there for no other reason than to listen and help. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge and without any awkwardness. Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/nugget today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/nugget. And now back to the show. I want to touch on a few things that brought to mind, and I had a couple more thoughts come to mind about my first tip, and then I'll move on. But going back to like the 2 sets of 5 sets of 2, whatever, I think it can work really well if you have a longer training block to start with the fewer sets with higher volume and then build towards more sets with more intensity. Right. If you don't know where to begin, that's a really good way to progress things over time. Another thing I was going to say with that too is I like to generally do more reps with my accessory exercises. That's where I kind of break the 10 rule. Because doing like shoulder rotations, for instance, if you're trying to do 2 sets of 5 and it's heavy, that's fucked. Like it feels so gnarly, and it just feels like it's going to break something. So
yeah, quick interjection. Sorry, I meant to say this during the isometrics thing. When it comes to things like the shoulder external rotations or lateral raise, they're very hard to progressively overload with weight unless you have fractional weights.
Because those jumps are huge.
Because going from 8 pounds to 10 pounds in a lateral raise, or 15 to 20, heaven forbid, is like a huge jump.
25%.
So like, if you want to just get that sick deltoid pump with your lateral raises, like just hold an isometric at the top of the range for like 10 or 15 seconds and then do your working set. And then next week, hold it for 20 seconds and then hold an isometric at the end of every rep, right?
That's a good tip.
Yeah. Isometrics are amazing if you just throw them into the middle of the range of motion.
Yeah.
Same thing if you only have like 3 kettlebells at your house, throwing an isometric in. If you're doing like a kettlebell bent over row, do an isometric at the top for 2 seconds on every rep. You know, that'll make it easier to eventually jump up to your next kettlebell.
Yeah.
Right.
That's great. What else was I going to say? Oh, you mentioned the fact that you want to start your workouts with the bigger compound lifts. Mm-hmm. And that brought this thought to mind. I just wanted to chime in. That's really good. And it's not only nice because it warms you up, but I think I learned this from Steve Bechtel. This is widely known in the strength training world. When you start with like a deadlift or you start with a weighted pull-up that recruits your whole back and your lats and all these muscle groups, your body's going to just be firing off so much like growth hormone, and everything else you do in that workout is going to benefit from that. So if you start with that, you're like really setting the tone for all these other exercises to basically just make better gains.
And like you said earlier, it is the ultimate warm-up. Like once you've done heavy deadlifts, you can pretty much do anything else, and you don't need to worry about whether like your core is going to be warmed up or whatever. Right. It's good to go. You might be tired depending on how heavy you're lifting.
This could end up being a longer episode. Okay, tip number 2 for me. It's okay to focus on the bare essentials. That is my tip number 2. I got really overwhelmed by the amount of stuff I could be doing or should be doing when I started weightlifting. Started really digging into it and learning about all these different exercises and barbells and kettlebells and body weight stuff and hardstyle training and rings. And it just like feels really overwhelming. It took me a while to realize that you don't have to do it all at once. And these things that you work on persist, I think, more than people assume. Mm-hmm. So you don't, for instance, I use this example all the time. I did a deadlift block a couple summers ago. I did like 10 workouts over the course of 3 months. So I don't weight train as much as people think I do. I think that's another thing I want to.
That's because you're jacked, dude. People just assume.
Yeah. But I did this deadlift block. I got up to 405, which was an arbitrary life goal, and I haven't deadlifted since at all.
Oh wow.
And I just started up again like a few weeks ago. And this time I'm doing sumo because I want to hit on something different.
Nice.
And it felt rusty for the first like 2 workouts. And I feel the strength coming back so quickly. Like for a lot of people, I think that stuff sticks around. And, you know, I could have obviously done a little bit of maintenance over the last 2 years if I felt like I needed it. But that's something I realized is you kind of build up all these different pillars over time. You know, you don't have to tackle everything at once. Just focus on a few things that feel like a high priority that will make you robust or that are relevant for your goals or things you've never done before, and build them up to a level that you feel satisfied by. And then it's okay to set them aside and focus on new things next time. I think there's a lot more overlap than people assume. You know, switching from like weighted pull-ups to lock-off training or to heavy rows or, you know, even like heavy bicep curls. There's a lot of crossover or like overlap there. So you're going to maintain a lot of that strength.
And a lot of those, specifically climbing, is great to maintain. Like
totally. And if you just climb hard, you might not have to do any maintenance. Yeah.
Totally. This isn't a tip in my tips, but like if there's one thing I see climbers do with their own training that kind of is, how should I put this? I don't know, almost comical, I guess, is just way too much pulling training. Like that's the thing that you get the most of. And I know that everybody wants to be stronger at pulling, but that's part of the reason that you wind up with so many upper body injuries. It's like there's a good chance that benching is going to carry over to your climbing way better than you think. And you could take those weighted pull-ups you're doing and bench instead. And it's probably not going to take anything away from your pulling strength. And it's probably going to make you feel better on the wall, in my opinion, right? Pulling, I think shoulder accessories and stuff, there's a different argument for that. But in general, it's like you don't need to be doing weighted pull-ups 3 days a week and also climbing on a board 3 days a week. Like you're probably overdoing it.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. That was
it. That was tip number 2.
That kind of made me, I want to just quickly say something which clicked in my brain when you said that tip about keeping it basic. I just wanted to say, like, if this is all totally new to you, as far as like starting with the basics and keeping it really simple, just step number 1 is to like go into the weight room and just hang out in there at your local climbing gym. I'm assuming they have a weight room at it. Like just go pass through it, check out how everything's set up, you know, maybe like notice how somebody is setting up to do a lift. Like when you pay for your membership, you are entitled to go in there. You can be a part of that space. You don't need anyone's permission. You don't need any special knowledge to go over there and like feel what that feels like to stand in the weight room part of the gym. And I know that it can be like really intimidating. It's still intimidating for me, especially when I go to a normal people gym. Normal people gym. My
like
brother,
a Planet Fitness or Gold's or whatever.
My brother is like he's not a climber. He's like a yoked heavy equipment operator. You know, I forget how much he benches. He benches 1,000 pounds. He's like ridiculous. I think it's like 300 or something. But he's like really jacked. You know what I mean? So when I go lift at the normal gym with him, you know, I feel I feel like the scrawny little kid who's coming in with his older brother. You know, and that's kind of what I am. It's intimidating.
You can always do some weighted pull-ups and blow everybody's mind.
Oh, for sure. I replace whatever my pulling training is with 1-arm lock-offs that day for sure, so that I look cool. Yeah. Or I like bring my finger training device and do like pickups off the ground or something. Yeah. For the ego. The important thing is once I'm in there lifting for 10 minutes, it feels normal, right? At first, it feels weird because I'm like, ooh, this is like a different space than I'm usually in. And I think a lot of people really struggle with the idea, especially the identity part of coming around to weight training. It's a very, I mean, let's be honest, it's a very male-dominated, hyper-masculine, testosterone-y kind of environment, and that's not comfortable for everyone. So step 1, walk in there, feel what it feels like. If you don't like it, just do it for 2 minutes. Try to do 5 minutes the next time. Try to do 10 minutes the next time. Maybe the next time after that, you pick up a weight, right? When I start people on something like benching, the first day of benching is like, just learn where the bench goes, what height the J-cups go at, what it feels like to put the bar in the J-cups. You know, moving the barbell is fucking hard for people if they're not strong, right? There's a lot of stuff to learn before you even get to form.
Yeah.
And it's okay that your learning process starts before you lift 0 pounds. And I think it's just important to acknowledge that. I wish that this had been one of my actual tips because it's like really important.
Yeah. Well, it's fun. I feel like we're riffing more this time than we usually do. But yeah, going back to focusing on the bare essentials, it's literally okay to have a weightlifting program that's one exercise. I remember talking to Drew Ruana years ago when he was probably 16 or 17. I think it was the season that he climbed Assassin at Smith 9A. he was already insanely strong. I think he'd already climbed the Swarm down in Bishop. And I think at that time, he was, just doing all of his normal youth kid training on boulders and stuff. And he was just benching. That was the only thing he was doing in the weight gym for like 2 years, was just benching.
Yeah. It shows in his climbing.
Yeah. He got insanely strong. That's crazy.
He's a poster child for the bench press being like an incredible exercise for climbers. Directly. It's like my pet peeve is people saying it's an antagonist exercise.
What is it, you think? Is it like compression moves? That's what I always hear. That's like
for sure compression moves.
Go-to.
But also think about any time your hands are offset on the wall. What is your bottom hand doing?
Pushing.
It's not just pulling. It's definitely pushing, right?
Yeah.
And also the pec is one of the first muscles activated in the pull-up. It is a pulling muscle. It stabilizes the shoulder. So bench pressing.
There we go. And I just threw out bench. That's just an arbitrary random thing that I just went for. But yeah, whatever it is, like pick one thing, do that for a while, twice a week. Great. You don't have to do, 4 exercises, the big 4 or whatever. You don't have to do that. Just keep it really simple to start if you're overwhelmed.
For sure. Cool. This is perfect for my next tip, if I can. How many do you have left?
I have 1 more plus a bonus.
So 2. That's 2. All right. I'll just go.
The bonus one is short, to be fair.
Perfect. So my next tip, and people may have seen me post this on social media, but load is more important to pay attention to than form. If you choose the right load, your form is not going to matter as much, right? And that's very important to understand when you get into lifting. There are a lot of safe ways to lift a light amount of weight. As you go up in weight, your body will organize. And at a certain point, you kind of need to go up in weight in order to understand how to do the exercise, right? So choosing that correct load where it's not so much that you have a chance of failing, but it's enough to challenge you and you have to kind of move in a way that makes sense for your body. That is a very important skill in weight training, choosing that load. And different bodies will organize differently. So the form that you see someone else do at the gym, the form that you see on the internet, even if it's like a demonstration video from a coach or something, that form might not look the same as yours. And like, I know that if you and I deadlifted right now, there would be a lot of nuance in the way that we lift just because we have different like length limbs and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So the important thing for that session would just be to make sure that the amount of weight on the bar for each of us is appropriate for what we're trying to do that day. And that's just a really important tip in general for weight training. And that's something that you can take with you forever. Because when you're learning a new exercise, you don't need to worry too much about how to do it. You need to worry a lot about making sure that the amount of weight on the bar is appropriate for you. And then you'll be fine. And you'll figure the form out as you go. That's my tip.
That's great. Okay, tip number 3 for me is get specific strategically and only after you build a base. I've had a bunch of conversations with Aiden Roberts recently, and I'm really inspired by his replica training and the way that he like targets specific muscle groups to get ready for specific projects and stuff. All that's like really cool. It gets me excited. It's like, it feels sexy. I'm like, oh, I'm going to come up with this crazy shoulder exercise to train for bear toss or whatever. But there's a time and a place for that. And I think somewhere that a lot of people go wrong, if you don't have a foundation of athleticism, especially, and you've never lifted weights before, I think it's a real mistake. Now it sounds like a pitfall, but I think it's a mistake to get too specific too soon. So it's okay to get specific closer to your goal, but if it's a really weird, unique, or specific exercise, don't hammer it. And don't hammer it, especially if you're working those types of muscle groups or joints or positions on the wall.
Yeah.
Don't do both at the same time. So, yeah. A little more focus, I think, on general athleticism and base strength is a good idea most of the time in the weight room.
Especially when you're starting out.
Totally.
And kind of like we opened with in the intro, like I think a lot of people, especially probably younger people, are going to feel like they don't need general weight training. But again, like there's such a big benefit from it, aside from the whole, like you're aging and you need your body to work well, like the coordination element is really helpful. There are just general psycho benefits to lifting weights, forms of exercise that aren't rock climbing. And all those things are kind of true of something like an external rotation or whatever, but they're way more true of like a squat or a deadlift or a bench.
Right. I mean, I used to have lower back pain when I was like 18, and I've never had it since I started deadlifting.
Yeah. I had a lower back injury literally a month ago. And you know what I didn't do for a couple months before that? I wasn't deadlifting. Can't prove the causation, but it sure feels like it's there.
Where are you at with tips?
All right. So my last tip, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, because you said that you can do 3 days a week of climbing and then fit more strength training in. But maybe the biggest unlock for me with weight training in the last few years was reducing my climbing volume. You may need to reduce your climbing volume to make sure that you're adapting to the weight training the way that you want to, right? I think a lot of people see that as a downside, and they think of that as being like something that's going to prevent them from getting into weight training, because they're just afraid of climbing a little bit less. I think as a coach, it does seem to me like most, adults, recreational climbers, even recreational climbers at a very high level would probably benefit from climbing a little bit less, but we all love climbing and we want to do it as much as we possibly can. So that's not always on the table, But weight training can be looked at as something that, while it may reduce your climbing volume in the short term, it is probably increasing the total amount of climbing that you can do in your life. That is absolutely already true for me. I can feel the difference. Like a few, probably, I guess 5 years ago, I wasn't really doing any weight training. I could feel that decline. I was staying pretty strong for climbing, but I was falling apart in a lot of other ways. And weight training has really helped me like stem that tide. It's not like I'm not aging, but I'm staying strong for climbing. And I also can like move house or pick heavy things up. And for me, that's really important because that stuff really was interfering with my performance. I would like tweak my back moving something, and then there goes the weekend of climbing, right? So losing a session of climbing for 2 sessions of weight training a week or something until I'm adapted to those 2 sessions a week is not that big of a cost to pay, right? Because I'm not losing those other days that I would have been just from being weak, basically.
Yeah.
Right. And it shouldn't be a concession that you have to make forever, as long as you're eating enough to support your exercise, your stress is good, your sleep is good, all that stuff. With some people in some situations, it might be like more of a not a permanent shift, I want to say, but like something that you want to get used to, like introducing the strength training, maybe doing a little bit less climbing. For the majority of people out there, I don't think they're going to regret that. I think it'll take them a couple months to get used to it, and then they're going to feel so much better that they're going to realize climbing 3 days a week or climbing even 2 days a week is better. I have one notable client who, Alex, shout out Alex, who lives in Finland, and he climbs a lot less than he used to before we started working together, and he is absolutely crushing climbing 2 or 3 days a week because he has so much room in his recovery that when he does go outside, he can kick ass, or when he does go on a trip, he can climb 3 or 4 days out of 5, right? And climb hard, and then come home and go back to chilling, do a little bit of weight training, do a little bit of climbing on the board, right? Keep the volume really low, keep his recovery really high in season, and he's able to just perform consistently. And I think it's hard to get people to come around to that, but I think weight training is kind of a good introduction to that, to just paying attention to your total volume. I think it's something that a lot of climbers really don't think about so much. They just go to the gym Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, or whatever, and climb until they're tired, right?
Right.
And weight training is much more regimented and much more predictable. And so even if you need to take a little climbing out, you fit that weight training in, and you're going to learn something about your total volume, and it's probably going to go up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you share all that, because I think when you started talking, I was a little surprised because this all fits you, but you've described yourself as an outlier and you're the skills and tactics guy. So it's like, oh, really? You want people to climb less to focus more on weight training? But
well, I mean, I'm talking to people who I perceive as climbing too much, probably in the first place.
It's really like getting rid of the junk miles and just the time spent thrashing around in the gym.
Yeah, I think it in a way, it comes back to the idea that you only adapt to the imposed demand if you have space to recover from it. So if you're already climbing so much that you're kind of like taking all your sessions to like the death, basically, adding weight training in, you're probably not going to adapt to that weight training.
Right.
You probably are only minimally adapting to your climbing. You're probably like surviving it more than you're adapting to it.
Right.
So I guess I'm saying there are 2 realities. Reality number 1, you want to thrive from the climbing you're doing and not just survive it. You want to adapt to it. So those sessions, you might want them to be shorter. And then thing number 2 is weight training is a good way to understand how you adapt to exercise and how much total volume you can tolerate. The thing that makes me different is that because of how much food I can take in, my total work capacity is limited by nature. And so I kind of have to balance what things I want to do and what adaptations I want. And weight training, it's like I only have so much headroom basically, right? And so like weight training does...
Because of like autoimmune stuff for people.
Right. So weight training like does tamp down the amount of climbing that I can do.
Yeah.
But in the long run, again, in the 20-year view, it's increased by weight training because I'm not getting weaker.
Right.
Or I'm slowing down the rate at which I'm getting weaker, hopefully.
It seems like you're getting stronger the last
I fucking
few
hope
years,
so.
if anything. Yeah, that's
I hope
great.
so.
That's another thing. I mean, like, you know, we hear all those studies, like after 35, you lose muscle, whatever. But generally, those studies are done on normal people. And if you're eating a lot of protein and you just started weight training in your mid 30s, you're probably going to be like in the best shape of your life in your mid 40s, you know?
Oh yeah.
You're going to kick your 20-year-old's ass and it's going to be awesome. So
I'll shout out one more client. This is the client shout out section. My client, Jason, who I think is 49 and absolutely wipes the floor with me in every conceivable strength metric. He is an absolute beast. He's basically like my idol. Like I want to be like him 15 years from now.
That's awesome.
Or sorry, I just jumped back in time. 12 years from now. Shit. I got old. I got old in that sentence.
Yeah. Okay. Final tip, bonus tip. I'll keep this one short. My bonus tip is learn about hardstyle. I first learned about this from a company called Strong First. They really focus on kettlebell strength. Barbell, kettlebell, and body weight strength, but everything is hardstyle. And an exercise called the hardstyle plank is a really good place to start. But I think what I really like about kettlebells is it kind of necessitates that sort of training. But really, it's a style of training in which you're learning to really connect with all the different parts of your body. So if you're doing a kettlebell press, overhead press, for instance, you're like learning how to engage your legs and your butt and your back and everything and keep everything tight. You're like squeezing your opposite fist as hard as you can and squeezing the kettlebell as hard as you can, learning how to generate tension and get rid of energy leaks. And that style of training for me has really transferred to the wall in a cool way. So
interesting.
Yeah, maybe it's not a fundamental thing, but it kind of is. Like I learned about that pretty early and it's an interesting thing to play with. But yeah, if I had to pick one exercise, it's really simple. There's tons of videos, I'm sure, online, but learn how to do a hardstyle plank and replace your minute-long planks with 3 sets of
Harder
like
ones.
10-second hardstyle.
Yeah.
And just see what happens. It's really interesting.
I think that's fascinating. I feel like the part that would connect that to the wall for me would be doing the hardstyle thing and then just using it as a way to learn how to engage each individual thing. And like when somebody pokes you and you do find that energy leak and you learn how to turn that muscle on, maybe later you know how to turn that muscle on the wall. But it's almost like you want the opposite on the wall, right? You want to just engage the stuff that's important for the move that you're doing.
Right. I mean, hardstyle would probably apply to like crux moves, but I think about like when you're, when you're doing a long reach and you have to keep the foot on and the foot's really far away. That's like such
I feel like this is a different podcast, but I definitely am not trying to squeeze my whole body when I'm doing that.
Interesting.
Very interesting, but worth exploring hardstyle planks for sure.
Yeah. I think it's, climbing's all about learning how to turn on and off tension, right?
Right.
So I think hardstyle is a really good tool for that.
Fundamentals Season 3, how to keep your feet on distant footholds.
It's just us arguing for an hour.
Well, we're different people.
Okay. Pitfalls.
I have 3. How many you got?
I have 4.
All right. It's all you.
Okay. One's a bonus, which means nothing. Okay. So you've already talked about this. I'll keep this concise, but my pitfall number 1 is with weight training is doing either too much or too little. I think when people start, again, I think they just think they feel like they need to dive into the deep end and do everything they could conceivably do. And that's totally unnecessary and counterproductive. I'm just going to throw out random examples again, because hopefully this is helpful if you have no idea where to start. But for most people, I would say that weight training like 2 months a year during the off season and weight training 2 days a week is probably enough to set you on a very different path than you would have otherwise been on. I mean, a lot of people get really strong without ever touching a weight. So don't overthink it if you're pressed for time or you just don't enjoy it. It doesn't have to be much. If you want to do more of like a minimal effective dose approach, or you're a weekend warrior and you train in the gym during the week, I think just 1 to 2 times per week, more or less all the time, can be really good. You can really back off the volume if that's the case. If you're trying to send and you're kind of more in season, backing all the way off to like doing 3 sets of 2 or 2 sets of 3 or even 2 sets of 2 with some of your heavy lifts is usually plenty to maintain strength, sometimes even to build strength if you're newer to those exercises. Again, Drew Ruana, that was an interesting thing. He was doing like 2 sets of 2 pull-ups once or twice a week recently at one point. That was the only training he was doing in addition to going out and climbing V14s all the time. And his numbers just kept going up and up and up and up and up. And it was insane. He was like eventually doing weighted pull-ups with more than his body weight attached to him. And I was like, why don't you just do one arms? And he's like, well, obviously I do those too. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But he's like, idiot. Obviously I do those too.
Yeah.
Anyway, it really doesn't have to be much. But then on the flip side, some people like yourself, Jesse, do find that they need to do more maintenance, and you don't want to work really hard for a training season and then let all that hard work go to waste. So just get to know yourself. It'll be really obvious after you've gone through a couple seasons. But again, even if you do find that you're someone that needs some maintenance, it's really not that much. Like 1 workout every 10 days is probably enough for most people to maintain a good amount of strength. So
my first pitfall was going ham, which I feel like you kind of covered in doing too much. So instead of saying my first pitfall, what I'll say is I think a lot of younger people will think that weight training might not be worth their time because they're like not old yet and they're not aging. But especially for guys, but also true for women, when you're younger, you also respond to exercise faster for like hormonal reasons and for just reasons of you're young and you have more energy to spare. So a little bit of energy invested when you're younger pays a bigger return on investment than the same amount of energy invested, 10 years later or whatever. So like on the one hand, yes, only lifting a couple months in an off season does make sense as a way to get into it. But also if you enjoy it, it might not be a question of how much weight training you need in order to maintain, like the minimum amount that you need in order to maintain the strength that you've built. It might be a question of how much is it worth it to you to know that you're going to be really fucking strong when you're in your 40s, right? And maybe you give up a skosh of climbing to do that 1 day of weight training a week because you're in a period of your life where you're just going to get jacked and get really strong really easily, right? And I know that some people are probably afraid of when I say getting jacked. I think a lot of climbers think that's a bad thing. It's, as someone who's not that jacked, I assure you it's not that bad of a thing. And just by doing 1 day of weight training a week and definitely doing like pure force oriented strength training, you're not going to get so jacked that it's a problem.
If you program, that just comes down to programming. You can program your weight training to not make you any bigger if that's your priority.
So genetically, some people do respond with muscle protein synthesis to high strength, like to high force training. So that does kind of depend on what kind of person you are, but it's not going to happen accidentally.
Right.
If you're going in there and benching 225 once a week for like months on end and you get bigger, what's kind of like, well, yeah, you probably should have seen that coming. But at that point, we can't call you an amateur, so it's not an accident, right? Like you knew you were going to get jacked if you were doing that. So, and my original pitfall, just to touch on it really quickly, is when it comes to strength training, you need to be able to adapt to it. Specific adaptation to impose demand. So, if you don't recover, you don't adapt, and at that point, it really doesn't matter what things you picked or how well you did them or anything like that. If you do too much stuff and you don't recover from it, it's not going to serve you well. Don't go ham. Be scientific about it. You can still be intuitive. Just follow the rules of how strength training works, which I think we've done a reasonable job of laying out so far.
And we will be right back. This episode is brought to you by Rhino Skin Solutions. Rhino provides the best skincare products on the market for climbers, made from plant-based, great quality ingredients with no fillers and no BS. I've actually been following a pretty strict autoimmune paleo diet for several months now for health reasons, and I've found that my skin is actually better and I don't need to use as many skincare products, which is really interesting. However, Rhino is still my go-to when I need extra skin support. They make really high quality products and they can be really helpful for folks who struggle with really any kind of skin issues. On the healing and repair side of things, they have Split and Split Plus if you have torn or cracked skin. It's really great for trad climbers if the backs of your hands are torn up and bloody. They also have Repair Cream, which is still the product that I use the most. Anytime my skin is super thin and I want to give it a little extra healing support, I'll apply Repair Cream multiple times in the evenings. They also have products for climbers with sweaty skin and climbers with really dry skin. Their antiperspirant products use non-toxic ingredients and can help keep your skin from sweating in warm conditions. And on the flip side, Rhino Spit is designed for climbers whose skin is too dry. One of my close friends has really dry skin and glassy skin, and she tends to dry fire a lot. She just blasts off of holds unexpectedly because her skin is too dry. And Rhino Spit has been a game changer for her. If you want to level up your skincare game, head over to rhinoskinsolutions.com and enter code NUGGET at checkout for 20% off your next order. That's rhinoskinsolutions.com. Use code NUGGET at checkout for 20% off and start taking better care of your skin today. This episode is brought to you by PhysiVantage. I have a new favorite snack that I've been having before I climb that I want to tell you guys about. Here's what I do. I take half a cup of frozen organic mixed berries. I add half a cup of frozen organic banana. Then I add 2 scoops of vanilla supercharged collagen from PhysiVantage. I add some organic orange juice and some water. I blend that up in my magic bullet. It's super quick. It's delicious. It's a vanilla collagen fruit smoothie. I'm getting some collagen and some high quality carbohydrates and nutrients before my workout. I drink this about an hour before I climb and I feel awesome. I've been climbing really well recently, and I think this is part of the reason why. Collagen has tons of research behind it, and it has loads of benefits for climbers. I take supercharged collagen before any kind of climbing or finger training. It supports my connective tissue, and I really think it helps me get the most out of my training. If you would like to feel the PhysiVantage and try my delicious collagen smoothie, head over to physivantage.com and use code NUGGET15 at checkout to save 15% off your next order. That's physivantage.com and use code NUGGET15 at checkout to save 15% off your next order. And now back to the show. Nice. Yeah, climbers have this funny tendency to like either be doing nothing, or if we decide we're going to lift weights, we're just going to go to like level 10 right away. And we want to do all the things that we could do. And we want to do 3 sets of all of them. And we want to do it three times a week. It's like, well, if I'm going to train, I don't want to train less than I could, but it's so silly. Like anything more than 0 is more than what you were doing before. So just, yeah.
I feel like
chill out.
A rough like ad lib of an email that I've gotten like a lot of times from clients is something to the effect of, I'm feeling really tired. I had a deload week last week. I just am not quite as recovered from it as I thought I would be. I was thinking of adding more weight training to the plan next week. That's like a very standard kind of climber take. It's like, well, a lot of stuff was pretty good. Therefore, more stuff would be even better, right?
Right.
It's just at a certain point, more stuff is not better than a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
You just want the right amount of stuff.
Right. I'm kind of going rogue again, but another thing I do, there's so much coming to mind. It's crazy.
It's a big topic.
There's so much to talk about. Yeah. Another thing that I find really helpful to think about is, okay, I'm finger training, I'm board climbing, and by finger training, mostly like general grip, like forearm and wrist stuff, but some finger stuff too. And I'm lifting weights. And if I progress all 3 of those, I will eventually explode.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point, I intentionally, and I go by feel with a lot of this stuff, but I'll have like a full month sometimes where I'm like, I'm not going to progress any of my lifts. I'm just going to keep doing the same lifts and try to progress my board climbing.
Yeah.
And I know that my overall training load is still fitting into your, said principle.
That's why autoregulation is cat's pajamas, dude.
Because the cat's pajamas. Nice.
Yeah, because you just show up in the gym and do hard things and then you leave and you don't worry too much about whether the numbers were the same numbers that they were. Like I had this lower back thing. I sprained my QL muscle in my lower back, right? And so I couldn't really climb for a few weeks, and then I kind of had to build back up, and my strength training had to change all my modalities and everything. And I'd also been on a climbing trip for like about a month before that. So I was very detrained, not very detrained, but I was slightly detrained coming into this injury in the first place. And like my benching now is not the same as it was last winter, right? But there's more to weight training than just trying to make the number go up on your bench. And there's more to weight training than just trying to make your chest stronger when you bench, right? It's also, you get a direct benefit from it. I feel like I've already said this on this podcast, but like it feels good more than just during the session and more than just like by getting stronger or building more muscle. Like it has a positive effect, and that's worth it right there. It doesn't matter if you're always overloading every single exercise, right?
Right.
If you want to adapt in a certain thing and get stronger, then yes, you should focus on that and overload that thing. But that's not necessary in order to get some benefit from it.
Right.
It's almost like something that it's just like thinking of it as like chores or something makes it sound not fun. But to me, like fitting in one strength training session a week is just like something I am fully committed to do for the rest of my life. Right. And probably two most weeks.
It's like a tonic for your body.
Yeah. And maybe I feel more that way than other people do because of my like particular situation, but I think there's probably a lot of people out there who will feel that way once they start.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Yeah. The numbers don't have to be going up for it to be doing something good. That's a lesson that took me a really long time to internalize, actually. So I think that's great.
Yeah.
Okay. My second pitfall, you've spoken to this a bit, but my second pitfall is not going heavy enough. I'm always kind of amazed. I'll see, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why this is, but I've seen a lot of grown men climbers get into weightlifting and they're like deadlifting less than 100 pounds for months because they're terrified of hurting themselves, or they're like obsessing over their form and trying to be perfect. And it goes back to everything that you said earlier. You cannot learn the form for what it's going to feel like to lift 300 pounds if you stay below 100 pounds.
Right. Any more than you can learn the form for climbing V8 by climbing V5.
Yeah. Exactly. And it just makes me kind of crazy. It's like, what are you doing? What is the point of even doing this? And these aren't like, it sounds judgmental, but these aren't people that have like injuries. These are like healthy grown men that I've seen do this sometimes. And anyway, my point is just to empower people listening to this, like you are not made of paper mache. Try hard and get fucking strong.
Yeah.
Like my girlfriend was just here visiting for a month and she wanted me to teach her how to deadlift. And she lifted more than 100 pounds her first day.
Sick.
Within 15 minutes. And she had like just climbed on the TB2 for like an hour and rapid fired a bunch of V0s and ones because she's brand new to climbing. And she's tiny and she's athletic, but she'd literally never done it before. And she lifted over 100 pounds within 15 minutes. And I haven't seen her try hard on the deadlift yet. Like she was just getting used to it, but she was willing to give it a little bit.
That's great. It helps to have somebody with you, encouraging you to go harder too.
Yeah.
And when I get those kind of prototypical clients who are like maybe a little bit hesitant with the deadlift, I do encourage them to go heavier. And I think often it's like beneficial for them, right? To have somebody in their corner kind of saying like, look, man, you climb V10 on the kilter board. Like, I think you can deadlift heavier than this, right? You still have to overload progressively. You still want to be careful. And to go back to my form thing, like choosing the right form is so important that I really do believe if you have a block in your brain where you can't go past one plate on you can't go past 135 pounds on a deadlift, then don't, right? But at some point you want to remove that block and go up a little bit and start adding some weight, right? I think the deadlift is a tough one. I think people are particularly afraid of the deadlift because for whatever reason in popular culture, it gets a very bad rap.
And I don't care if anyone deadlifts. I really don't care.
Yeah. Once you know all the basic lifts, I mean, you know this, like the deadlift is the safest lift to fail, right? Because you just drop the weight.
Yeah.
Like nothing is on top of you or above you or going to land on you, which in all the other lifts is not true.
You don't need a spotter. Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess a pull-up But a pull-up, you're dangling and you have to land on the ground.
Usually climbers are like standing on a box with a bunch of weight dangling between their nuts, and they're like, like if you just fall halfway through a pull-up, could actually be pretty bad.
Once you're good at them, the deadlift is like a very comfortable exercise. To fail on. So yeah, I mean, I would say you don't need to go to failure. I don't go to failure. Well, I'm not saying to fail on. I'm just mean if you feel uncertain at any point during the lift, you can just let go.
Yeah.
And it's fine. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You can kind of do that in a squat and a bench, but there's a form to bailing in those and like a system to bailing. Whereas in a deadlift, you can pretty much just stop trying and it's fine.
Yeah, totally.
I don't want anyone to feel like shamed or questioned. Like I want people to walk away from this feeling encouraged. So if that's you and you have like doubted yourself on the deadlift, I just urge you to slowly start adding weight to the bar every week. Don't make any heroic jumps.
Take your time with it.
Yeah, don't make any big jumps. Just try to go up 10 pounds a week. If you climb hard on a board, chances are pretty good that you can deadlift well over body weight, well over 1.5 body weight, probably pretty normal for a lot of climbers. I'm not making a benchmark assessment or anything. I just think it's fairly normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Double body weight should be achievable for like, I would say most people who are climbing like pretty hard.
Most men, is that different for?
No, I think probably true for most women too, but obviously arm length is going to play a huge role.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. I mean, like when I'm lifting, I have to focus. Like I have to maintain so much tension during a deadlift that I have to strategically plan my breaths. And like, that's the same as when we try really hard climbing. Like it should feel like that. It should feel like you're trying really hard.
That's great.
Okay. We're just beating a dead horse.
Okay. My next pitfall. My next pitfall
I'm all fired up because it's hot in here.
Yeah, I know. It's like doing a podcast in Thailand. My next pitfall is too specific, too special, or too fancy. So you kind of talked about this in your tips, but I think good exercise selection is kind of like pruning a garden. Like if you just have a whole bunch of random plants growing everywhere in your garden, it kind of just becomes a shit show. Like I guess master gardeners maybe take issue with that. There could be like a xeriscaped thing that looks nice or something, but a really nice garden is all about like making sure everything has space to grow and like the sun is getting to it. I'm taking this metaphor a little bit further than I probably needed to. So when it comes to exercise selection, you want to have like kind of two classes of exercise for the most part, but everything needs to serve a purpose. So you have your heavy compound stuff, right? The bench, the squat, the deadlift, all the variations of those things. You're doing sumo deadlift. It's a great variation. Weighted pull-ups probably qualify in there. Rows probably qualify in there. Those kind of like big prime movers that turn on a lot of muscles, they generally make you stronger. That's the bang for your buck and the stuff that's the most important for just being a stronger human in your life, right? Very important to have in the program. Then there's like other stuff that's maybe a little bit more specific. It's an adaptation that you're trying to get for your climbing. So we've talked a little bit about lateral raises or like external rotations or like, kettlebell halos, things like that for shoulder strength, right? Those things also have value, but it should be specifically selected to have that value, and it should still be hard. It might be hard to progressively overload. Like the lateral raise is very hard to progressively overload, but you should still be trying hard when you're doing a lateral raise, a set of lateral raises, right? Doesn't mean that it needs to be like 3 reps and you're like maxing out, but it probably should be you're going to pretty close to failure, right? Where it goes wrong is when the entire training plan is just 10 exercises that are all like a lateral raise. Basically, the end result of that is going to be you're going to get a bunch of like pumped muscles, maybe, and you're not really going to get that much stronger as a whole unit, right? It probably isn't going to interfere with your climbing too much, but you're also not going to benefit from it a lot, and you're going to waste a lot of time, and you're going to think that weight training sucks, right? The meat, those compound exercises, is very important to do, and it's very important to understand the impact of it. And then once you've gotten that baseline, you can scale it back to maintenance and you can focus on some of those other more specific things. But those compound things are always going to come back into the mix because that's where you get like the biggest benefit, especially as you get older.
Nice.
That's my pitfall. Too specific, too fancy.
It's great.
Yeah.
My third pitfall is not eating enough protein.
Oh, shit.
Bet you didn't see that coming.
Yeah, Fundamentals Season 3.
In a weight training episode. But yeah, I think that's a big pitfall. I think a lot of people undereat protein, full stop. And I think especially people who are training hard should be eating more protein than they probably are. I know this gets dicey. I mean, I've talked about disordered eating stuff a lot, and I know that that's a sensitive topic. But if you've never tracked your food, I think it's worth just trying to figure out how much protein you're eating on a given day, just so you have some kind of a benchmark. Because that's something I've noticed is a lot of people think they're eating more protein than they are. They're like, well, I eat eggs for breakfast, and then I have a protein shake after I climb, and then I had tacos for dinner. And it's like, well, you add it all up, it's 70 grams.
There's like 4 grams of protein in an egg. Eggs are great.
Eggs are great.
They're just
there's
not
like,
high
there's
protein.
Like 6. But yeah,
okay.
You have to eat a shit ton of
It's
eggs.
A small egg
like,
and a big egg.
Yeah, you have to like really eat a lot of eggs for it to add up to be significant. I know, totally.
Yeah, they're not high protein.
Yeah. But yeah, I speak to this. I will tell you guys what I do. I try to get 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. And I've had a lot of nutrition people on the show that know way more than I do about this stuff. But that's been a surprisingly consistent number, like 0.75 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. That's been a surprisingly consistent number. And I really have found personally that it has been kind of a game changer for me. Like I spent a lot of years frustrated with my training. I always felt like I was trading abilities back and forth. Like I would get strong in the off season and then I would get really fit at Smith and then I would go back and I'd go back. Yeah, I just kind of like ping pong back and forth and never feel like I was really getting anywhere. I felt like I had a finite amount of adaptation. And I mean, I guess we always do, but that's completely changed now that I eat more protein and more food in general. And I feel like my strength gains in the last like 4 to 6 years have been way more persistent. And when I build something up, it feels way more locked in just simply from eating more protein.
Yeah, getting more dialed.
Yeah.
For me, I probably can't eat as much total food as you in general, but I find if I'm consistently below 100 grams of protein for like more than a few days, I just start to like feel very run down. Like, and so that's like my baseline. And that's like a protein shake, a good portion of protein at lunch, a good portion of protein at dinner. I usually have like a more carb heavy lunch, but if I get that, I basically try to get like 30 grams from a shake, 30 grams from lunch, 30 grams from dinner for sure. And I know that I'll hit my 100 gram target, which for me is like more like maybe 2/3 my body weight, you know, or a little bit less than 2/3 of my body weight. If I can go higher, I will. I just often can't eat that much food in a day. But I notice for sure if I like don't have the protein shake or I miss one of those meals, like it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Sure.
And yeah, get it however you can get it. I mean, I'm a huge fan of getting it from whole food, but supplement, if you want to supplement, I don't just get it. Just try to get it. And
if you're feeling
treat it as like a 3-week experiment and just see what happens.
If you're feeling tired, and this is true whether you're weight training or not, but if you're just feeling tired and not recovering from the training or climbing that you're doing, even though you feel like you've done that amount in the past and recovered from it, just fucking start taking a protein shake every day. Like there's a pretty good chance you're just not recovering as well. Like, yeah, that's an intervention that's worked a lot of times for people, especially when you start weight training, but also just in general.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you add weight training on top of your existing climbing, you're going to need to eat more food. I know this is like a whole other podcast. Okay.
There we go.
My last pitfall, which I already said 5 times during this podcast, but it's not learning how to use autoregulation in some fashion. So in my current like coaching that I do, I try to get everybody on RPE. I think a lot of people just learn how to lift with RPE now, and they don't even learn like sets and reps as being the kind of main way to figure out your training, but they just learn the RPE first. And then once you understand RPE, you can start applying RPE with sets and reps, which is how it starts to really make sense. But the big thing is like autoregulation helps you stay consistent because you know you're going to get in there and get something done. A lot of plans that I write now, the strength training will be like 1 to 2 warm-up sets, 3 to 4 working sets, right? And I talk to the athlete about what it's going to feel like on a day where I would prefer that they do 3 sets versus 4, right? And we have like a range of weights, or I will just give them an RPE. I'll just say like this many reps roughly at this RPE, right? Or if I know their loads, I'll just say, you're going to do a deadlift, 250 pounds, go until you have 2 reps in reserve, 2 sets, you know, or 2 to 3 sets, right? And that's it. There's a lot of room in there for the athlete to interpret it, but that's actually a good thing. And they generally respond better to their exercise when they have that room to breathe instead of just showing up and doing the same thing every time. You're a very advanced athlete, so I think that works really well for you.
Well, Yeah, but I'm like hearing you say all this, and I'm actually quite curious to try it because, now that I'm training on this board all the time, I'm not responding to my weight training.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not sure yet, but I'm aware that I might not respond the same way that I did when I was, 6 years younger, and also like combining weight training with more Smith specific types of climbing.
Yeah, I think we talked about this elsewhere, but I even get a lot of like freedom or joy from not counting my sets. I just pick my load and my reps in reserve or my RPE, and I just take a video and I just lift until I feel like I'm at that RPE, and then I literally count my reps from the video. I do not count while I'm lifting, and it's so freeing. Because like if you've ever done
into how you feel,
if you ever done a hard set of deadlifts, like I can't count while I'm trying that hard. Especially if you're doing like a long set of something, like a long set of squats or something. Like
there's nothing worse than being like, fuck, was that 8 or 9?
Right. With RPE, that's not a problem. You just if you think you have another one in you, you do another one in your set.
Nice.
Right? So yeah, it's really common for me to program like 3 to 4 sets, 2 to 3 sets, or for a deload, I'll often program like 0 to 2 sets, and I'll let the athlete even like choose what exercises they want to do. And most of the time they wind up doing one working set. People underestimate the value, by the way, of one working set. You can go in the gym and just do one work. Like now that you have this set up, if you were climbing here for the season, just come in here, do one warm-up set of deadlifts, do one working set of deadlifts, 5-minute workout. Your deadlift number will stay higher during the in-season, and you are not going to get tired from that, right?
Yeah.
That has value. Your body will respond to that.
That's so fascinating. Why is that? I like...
It's because of the sets and reps, man.
I definitely have like a minimum of 2. I'm like, I have to do 2 sets.
It's the set and rep industrial complex. All right, what's your bonus?
Stick it to the man.
What's your bonus pitfall?
My bonus pitfall is forcing it. I think that is a big pitfall. I've kind of harped on this. I've been on a soapbox about this recently, but now that we're at the end of a hour and 20-minute episode about training with weights, don't fucking do it. If you hate doing it, don't force it. I don't always, and there's like caveats here, because I don't always love weight training, but I do enjoy it in general, and I feel satisfied when I stick to a program, and I like how it makes me feel. So I wouldn't say that I'm forcing it, at least right now, but there have been seasons where I've kind of known, like, I feel as though I should be doing some weight training, and I just wasn't feeling it.
Yeah.
And now I'm like mature enough and self-aware enough to know that like, oh, I'm just not going to do it. And that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you hate it and you don't want to do it, and you're adding like guilt and shame to yourself because you're not doing it, and you have a hard time getting started, and you've tried, and just don't worry about it.
Don't bother.
Yeah. Forcing anything, I think, is a recipe for burnout. And I also just was on the Careless Talk podcast with Aiden and Sam Pryor is doing this experiment right now where he just stopped doing like every form of training that isn't fun for him. And he loves climbing on a board. So obviously that works out pretty well for a climber who wants to climb hard, but he's climbing better than ever.
I think he also said his dad like did a 1-arm pull-up without training in his 40s. So might be an outlier.
Might have some genetic. Yeah. But my point is, there's no rules for this stuff. I mean, at the end of the day, we are all, listening to climbing podcasts because we just love climbing and we want to get better. And I just think it's important to know yourself and know what you're motivated by, and to not force it.
I think that's great. I think it's super important to give people room, like, not to do something. I don't want to add pressure to people or make them feel like they have to do something when they listen to a podcast. But I will say there's probably a lot of people out there, because I talk to these people all the time, who are like feeling really run down, and they're feeling like they're not getting out of their climbing what they want to. And like, at least for me, weight training has like, it's something I've done for a long time, but in the last handful of years, I've really like nurtured my practice with weightlifting. And I've found the weightlifting community to be like very inclusive and wholesome, and like praiseful. I don't know if that's a word. And just like generally much more kind-hearted and cool than I would have expected, based on the assumption that I had about like meatheads in gym and stuff. Cause I was like bullied when I was a kid, I don't want to get into all that, but like, I had a lot of assumptions, and I've been like really surprised by what a just positive community it is. So if that's your, if that's where you're at, if you feel tired and you're climbing and run down and maybe it's not about like getting stronger for your climbing or making a breakthrough. You just are curious about feeling better from day to day. Like, man, take a stab and go for it. You don't have to reiterate what you said, but definitely consider giving it a try, because for me, it has quickly become the second most important thing in my life physically, like after climbing.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, yeah, you don't have to do anything, but I also, to play devil's advocate against myself, I think also if you follow this, like the 10 rep rule, and you train a little heavier than you ever have before, like if you're someone who's only ever done like 15-minute abs and circuits and stuff that made you want to vomit, then there is a way to train with weights that you will enjoy so much more than you can possibly imagine.
Yeah.
Like there's ways to make it pretty dang enjoyable, and you should feel better after a workout rather than sweaty and like wrecked and tired and gross.
Those boot camp things, to bring it full circle to where we started, those boot camp things, or like 15-minute abs or whatever. 15-minute abs sounds savage. I think it's like 6-minute abs.
I don't know. I've known a lot of people. Yeah.
15 minutes.
Actually, this is funny because this ties into the podcast. Lizzie Van Patten, my very first guest, she's a friend of mine. I remember she reached out to me one time and she was like trying to get some help with training. She's like, Steven, you train, teach me how to train. And I was like, okay, well, what are you doing? And she like had decided she was having a hard time, and she reached out to me because she like had decided that she really didn't like weight training. Right. And then she told me what she was doing. And I was like, this is so much more heinous than anything I've ever done in the weight gym. Because you're just literally doing 15-minute like sufferfest ab workouts,
right,
where you feel like you're going to puke at the end.
Right.
And it's not getting you stronger. It's not getting you the results that you want. And it's horrible.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is like to go back to the first thing I said, specific adaptation to impose demand. If the demand you're making on your body is that you just like take your actual abs almost to failure like twice a week, that's what your body's going to adapt to. But you just use that flopping around on the floor. Like you really don't use your abs to stabilize your core all that much on the climbing wall. Like the other big prime movers that you use in things like the squat and the bench and the deadlift are like way better for that, right? So if all you care about is your climbing performance, 15-minute abs is not it.
Okay.
I feel like we covered it.
All right. Hope that was helpful. If you feel overwhelmed, sorry.
Now you even lift, bro.
Do feel free to reach out and send us questions if you have any. If anything was confusing, we would be happy to clarify and talk about it more. But yeah, hopefully something in there was helpful, and we will be back next time for finger training.
Ooh, thanks, y'all.
Bye, everybody.